Hello and welcome to yet another session of our Bgcse SE history interactions. In this installment, our focus should or would solely be on what you ought to do as a candidate when you are responding to your history paper 1 questions. As you should be aware, the history paper 1 comprises of 2 sections, section A and section B. Now, each section consists of questions of different difficulty levels. Across the 2 sections, all A part questions are, when compared to the others, very easy questions. Now, what I want to do is to take you through each one of the part questions and share with you insights about what each question demands. Now, for this installment, the paper that we shall be using as our guide is the 2016 paper. So I shall be picking some questions from here and in the process go about trying to shed some insights in terms of what it is that you ought to do. Now let's get straight into it. If you look at section A, it comprises of 2 questions. That is questions 1 and 2. And each one of the questions is made up of 2 part questions. You've got 1A and 1B, as well as 2A and 2B. Now, in answering the source-based questions, the expectation is that you are not only going to provide the message of the source, because the question would ask, what is the message of the source? You must provide the message of the source as well as evidence from the source, which supports that which you purport to be the message of the source, which you could perhaps refer to as evidence from the source. And I must also hasten to add that even though question 1B and question 2B are very much part of question 1 and 2, they are not in any way related to the source. In other words, when you respond to them, questions 1B and 2B, you are not supposed to link them or associate them with the source. You could say to some extent they are independent from the source. I hope that is clear to you candidates. Now, let's look at what is required in terms of, satisfying the demands of the A part question. The sample paper that I have here, the 2016 paper, had source A being in a textual format. It is an extract from some history book. It's a quotation, if you wish, hence it is a textual source. So when you respond to textual source kind of questions, the requirement is Whatever message that you come up with, that message should be supported by a direct quotation from the source. You must, in other words, quote from the source. So if I were to use this as an example, the question is, what does source A suggest about the economic way of life of the Tuju people? Explain your answer referring to the details of the source. Now, if you read through the source, you'd get to realize that it indicates that within Tuju middens, thin cane glass bits were found, and these were from Asia. So, what is the message? The message is very clear. The message is that Tuju people were traders. Why are we saying they were traders? Because in the source, there is reference to thin glass bits whose origins were traced to Asia. So if you're to craft a response to the question, it could be something like this. Source A suggests that those people were traders, as indicated by open quote. You are quoting. Those middens contained thin cane glass bits which had come from Asia. Full stop, close quote. And that will fetch you 3 marks. Now, the question has been allocated 4 marks. So for you to be able to score those 4 marks, you must provide 2 correct interpretations. And each one of those interpretations must be accompanied by evidence from the source, which must be in the form of a quotation, because the source is a textual source. Now, as you read into the source, go through the source, you'd get to realize that it also indicates that skeletons of men have been found buried in cattle kraals. And if you look at the question again, it is about the economic way of life of the Tutu people. So there is mention of cattle in the source. And from that, you'd immediately pick that, oh, those people kept livestock. Therefore, they were pastoralists. They were pastoral farmers. So your second message of the source here could be that those people were pastoral farmers, as indicated by skeletons of men have been found buried in cattle kraals. Full stop, close quote. So your evidence or your reference to the source should appear in quotation marks. Those are not your words. You have extracted them from the source. That is where your 4 marks come from. Now, in responding to this question, it's an A question for 4 marks. You are not expected, let alone required, to provide additional historical information. In this particular case, for instance, you are not obliged to go to the extent of telling the examiners that, as pastoral farmers, those people kept animals such as cattle, sheep, and goats. And the practice of rearing livestock was the responsibility of men. And from these livestock, they obtained food which they needed for their survival. Such information is only a must provide when you are dealing with Part B as well as Part C questions. I hope that is understood. Now, if you provide such additional information, you are eating into the limited minutes that you have. So stick to the basics, provide the interpretation, support the interpretation with evidence from the source. Two interpretations, each of which must be supported by evidence from the source. That's how you get your 4 marks. So that is that with the textual source. Let's quickly shift our focus to the pictorial source, which in this particular case, in the 2016 examination, is a painting which shows a trekking party of Boers during the Boer trek. So it is a picture, but the principle is the same. That is to say, if you want to score 4 marks, you must provide the message of the source and support that message with evidence from the source. Perhaps the only difference there is that your evidence, your reference should be a clear statement of that which you see in the source. Let's look at the example. Perhaps that will, put things in a clearer perspective. That would help you to understand what I'm talking about. Now, the question, the A-part question 2A, reads as follows. What does source B suggest about the Boer trek? Explain your answer referring to the details of the source. And that last part of the question is instructive in the sense that it indicates that you must also confine yourself to that which you see in the source. So let's try go for it. Now, one of the things that I see in the painting, it's an ox-drawn wagon which is loaded with goods and people. So because the source is asking about what the source suggests, my message here could easily be, the source suggests that when Boers left the Cape during the Boer trek, they left with their property. As I can see, an ox-drawn wagon loaded with goods in the picture. So people living with their goods, that is the interpretation. And then the message is in the wagon that is loaded with goods. Second, one interesting detail in the source is that there is a non-white in the painting who appears to be driving a flock of sheep. Now, that to me tells me that the message of the source is that when Boers left the Cape during the Boer trek, they left with some of their servants. As I can see a Kwekwe person or a non-white in the source driving or heading ship. That is how you get to 4 marks. Now, both questions 1 and 2, in other words, have B-part questions. So if you respond to them, or if rather your choice is question 1 or question 2, that which you do with question 1B should be the same thing that you do with question 2B. They are crafted the same. They are of the same difficulty level. Now, question 2B, as an example, requires you to explain 2 ways in which the Boer trek affected the Boers between 1834 and 1850. So you are supposed to provide 2 points, well reasoned. You do the same with question 1B. which requires you to explain two ways in which arable farming influenced the lifestyle of the Iron Age people. As these are explained questions, the requirement is that you should first identify, if we are to use question 1b as an example, the influences of arable farming on the lifestyle of the Iron Age people. If they use iron tools, this is what they are able to do. So after identifying their activities associated with arable farming, then you provide a brief description of those. Now that they have these, this is what they are able to do. And finally, they ought to be an explanation where now you could be reasoning with the facts. So let me give you a quick example on that. So your answer here could be arable farming led to the Iron Age people leading a sedentary lifestyle. They became permanent settlers, in other words, because of arable farming. That is you identifying the effect of the use of iron tools or iron implements. And then you must tell us how that came about. They now became sedentary settlers because they grew crops which they had to tend to take care of up until they were ready for harvest. So, in other words, they could not sow the seeds, they could not plow, and immediately after plowing, abandon their fields. They had to take care of them. Hence, a sedentary lifestyle, a settled village lifestyle. So, that is you reasoning with the facts. So, you're also saying, as arable farmers, they would produce enough crops to feed themselves. Therefore, it was not necessary for them to lead a nomadic existence where they go about looking for food items or for animals, wild animals to hunt, wild fruits to gather. Those activities became part-time activities during the Iron Age period because people had the capability, the capacity to feed themselves, thanks to the use of iron implements. I hope you are following. Now, this question is worth 6 marks. So, how do you get to 6 marks should perhaps be the question. The answer to that is not complex. Just provide 2 explanations, 2 points. Because the first point that is fully explained will take you to 4 marks. And the second one, the next one, will take you to 6 marks. Well, you might feel, well, I'm not too sure about one of the explanations in terms of its, strength. So, is it okay if I throw in the third point? It is okay to do that. No one is going to penalize you. But I need to caution you that time is of the essence. If you spend a lot of time on this question trying to figure out what your third point is going to be, you are likely not to have enough time to deal the bulkier section of the paper, section B of the question, because therein are 3 questions that you are expected to answer, each of which has 3 parts. So you can provide a third explanation as an insurance in some way, but be mindful of time. Let's look at the second example in terms of how arable farming could have influenced the lifestyle of the Iron Age people. We talked about them leading a sedentary lifestyle because they grew crops. Another argument could be that arable farming contributed to the Iron Age people having large families or living or having large populations. And you must tell us why. This was the case because they produced or they grew a variety of crops using iron implements. Your sorghum, your millet, your pumpkins, your watermelons. And then you are saying food was in abundance, it was readily available. And therefore, these people tended to have large families because they would not struggle to feed them. That's your second point, fully explained, and you score your 6 marks. All right, let's quickly look at section B. Now, in section B, like I said, there are 6 questions from which you choose any 3. So the order of questions really does not matter in terms of whether I should start with question 8 or should I start with question 3. That really does not matter as long as you number your work. As long as it is very clear to the examiner that this is question 8, A, B, C, and here's question 4, A, B, C. So what I'm trying to put across is you must begin this section by way of choosing the easiest questions. That which in your view is the easiest question should be your first choice, because you are trying to manage time, I beg your pardon, as much as you possibly can. The objective is to finish the examination on time. Now, the section comprises of an assortment of questions, a variety of questions, which also are of different difficulty levels. The A questions are always low order questions. They may ask you to state, to list, to name, or to describe, or even to give. So if it is state, name, list, for example, state any 4 reasons why the Portuguese developed interest in the Congo Kingdom in the late 13th century. You just draw a list. Roman figure 1, this is the factor. Roman figure 2, 3, 4. If it is described, then it says write in continuous prose, continuous writing format. If the question is described, as an example, any 2 methods used by archaeologists to find evidence about the past. Present the ideas in a continuous writing format. One of the methods used by archaeologists to find evidence about the past place is to locate it. That's your example. I seem to be having issues here with the air conditioning. It's a bit hot in here. Let's continue. The B question is standard in that all B questions in the section requires you to explain any 2 factors. So it is the same as the B question in section B. Section A, where you explain any 2 factors, any 2 reasons. The C question is slightly different. There are variations in terms of the formats the C part questions would take. Sometimes they would give you 3 factors, as it is the case here. Let's use this example. It says, the following equally contributed to the development of the Ndebele kingdom. and then they give you a list of factors which you are supposed to use to answer the question. Roman figure 1, in our example, is tribute. The second factor, Shona religion. The third factor, regiments. So when you answer this question, you first need to take a stand. I agree with the statement. It says how far do you agree, rather. So if it is how far do you agree, your stand should indicate the extent to which you agree or disagree with the question. So I agree with the statement to a large extent or to a small extent, or I disagree with the statement to a large extent or to a small extent. So that is important. Your stand is important. It is worth a mark, and that is 1 mark. Now, I was saying, because you are given factors, the expectation is, the requirement is, use those factors to respond to the question, to argue your case. So when you are given these factors, these are the only factors, in other words, that you must use to answer the question. Confine yourself to the 3 factors which you have before you. Do not bring in other factors from somewhere, because that is a recipe for disaster. It says you are going to fail the question because you would have not restricted yourself to the factors that are in the question. Now, in other instances, the C question could be different. They will give you 1 factor. Let's look at this example. It's a statement, and it reads as follows. The slave trade was the most important reason for the collapse of the Congo Kingdom. How far do you agree with this statement? Explain your answer using the given factor, the factor in the question, and 2 other reasons. So you've been given guidance there in terms of what it is that you must do. So you are supposed to use the factor that is in the question, which in this particular case is the slave trade. So you show the contribution of the slave trade to what's the collapse of the Congo Kingdom. And then after that, show how 2 other factors contributed. So in essence, you must provide 2 explanations on top of the explanations which would have been informed by the factor that was given in the question. I hope that is clear. Now, those are the formats. That is what you ought to expect. Sometimes there's a slight variation. Instead of a statement, they would pose a question. Here is an example. Was one of the following factors more important than the others in helping Botswana Bgcse to reconstruct their states after the Mfecane? And then they give you a list of the factors: Camelo system, incorporation of non-Tswana groups, tribute system. Take your stand. Was one of the factors? Your stand should be all factors were important, or no factor was more important than the others. So you cannot, in other words, pick 1 factor and argue in 3 distinct ways to say, this is how this particular factor contributed towards helping Botswana to reconstruct their kingdoms. So you must use all those 3 factors to argue your case. That is how you score your 10 marks. In fact, we must also add very quickly that your stand is 1 mark. When you explain the first factor, that takes you to 4 marks. A full explanation of the second factor takes you to 6 marks. And then the third factor, fully explained, takes you to 8 marks. So our intention is to score 10 marks. How do we get to 10 marks? provide a reasoned conclusion, which says a good conclusion is what you need to get to 10 marks. So if your conclusion is good, then you will get to level 5, 10 marks. If it is good but not good enough, that takes you to 9 out of 10, which isn't bad. Now, let me make a quick comment about what goes into a conclusion. A conclusion, boys and girls, it's a statement, which is an evaluation kind of a statement to say, these have been my arguments in the essay. But overall, as I have argued in my essay, it is clear that this factor contributed the most to the development of Tswana states because of, and then you present your reasons. So it is a summary of some sort. You could also say in your conclusion, as I have argued above, all three factors equally contributed. If the question is about state reconstruction by Tswana Yukhus, contributed to the reconstruction of Tswana states. And then you briefly show us how each one of the factors contributed or facilitated state reconstruction. So a conclusion is a summary, in other words. You are sitting for your paper if you are a candidate for the 2022 examination series on Monday. And if you lay your hands on this particular video, listen very closely to the insights which I have shared with you and implement them, make good use of them. And I tell you what, when the results are published, you shall be smiling from ear to ear. That, boys and girls, is the little story about what you expected to do as you respond to paper 1 questions, which consist of items or questions of different levels of difficulty. We know there are no alternative facts. Goodbye.